The warm spring sun hung lazily in the afternoon sky over Rochester, New York, as Officer James Morton began his regular patrol shift. At 34 years old, with 8 years on the force, Morton had developed what he called a sixth sense for spotting violations. His colleagues often joked that he could spot a broken taillight from 3 blocks away. Today, that particular skill would lead to an incident that would change not just his life, but an entire community. Driving his black and white patrol car down Maple Street, Morton's eyes constantly scanned the suburban neighborhood. The street was lined with modest two-story homes, their front yards neat and tidy, with children's bicycles scattered here and there. It was a peaceful area, mostly middle-class families who had lived there for generations. The clock on his dashboard read 2:45 p.m. School would be letting out soon. As he approached the intersection of Maple and Oak Street, a dark blue Honda Odyssey minivan caught his attention. The vehicle was moving slightly under the speed limit, but something else made Morton's trained eye linger. He followed at a distance, and there it was. The passenger side taillight was clearly broken, with a crack running through the red plastic cover. Behind the wheel sat Michael Wilson, a 42-year-old professional, wearing a crisp white shirt and tie. Next to him was his wife, Sarah Wilson, 39, a local elementary school teacher. In the back seat, their children Samantha, 9, and Marcus, 7, were still wearing their school uniforms from Rochester Academy, their backpacks placed neatly beside them. The Wilsons were returning from a parent-teacher conference at their children's school. The meeting had gone well. Both kids were excellent students. Samantha, in particular, had just won the school's science fair with her project on renewable energy. The family was discussing stopping for ice cream to celebrate when they noticed the police lights flashing behind them. Officer Morton radioed in the license plate number and location before stepping out of his patrol car. The spring breeze carried the scent of blooming magnolias from nearby trees, a stark contrast to the tension that was about to unfold. He adjusted his body camera, making sure it was recording, department policy for all traffic stops. As he approached the minivan, Morton observed the Wilson family through the windows. His right hand rested instinctively on his utility belt, a habit formed through years of training. The afternoon sun reflected off the car's windows, creating a glare that made it slightly difficult to see clearly inside the vehicle. Michael Wilson had already rolled down his window and placed both hands on the steering wheel, just as his father had taught him years ago. Sarah sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, trying to project calm for their children's sake. In the back seat, Samantha watched with growing concern, her dark brown eyes wide with worry. She had just learned about civil rights in school, and something about this situation made her stomach feel tight with anxiety. License and registration, Morton said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone that had become second nature over his years of service. He noticed the Honor Roll Parent sticker on the rear window and the small cross hanging from the rearview mirror, but his attention was focused primarily on Michael's movements. Michael spoke clearly and calmly. "May I reach for my wallet, officer?" "It's in my back pocket." Morton nodded, his posture remaining rigid. As Michael carefully retrieved his license, Sarah located the registration in the glove compartment. The atmosphere in the car grew heavier with each passing second. Through the rear-view mirror, Michael could see Samantha's growing distress. She was a sensitive child, always deeply affected by tension or conflict. Marcus had scooted closer to his sister, sensing her unease. Officer Morton took the documents back to his patrol car to run them through the system. The Wilsons waited in tense silence, watching him in their mirrors. What should have been a routine traffic stop was about to spiral into something none of them could have anticipated. In his patrol car, Morton scrolled through his computer screen, reviewing Michael Wilson's record. Clean driving record, no outstanding warrants, registration up to date. Everything was in order, except for that broken taillight. He began writing up a warning ticket, unaware that in the next few minutes, his actions would trigger a chain of events that would make national headlines and force an entire police department to confront its deepest issues. Little did anyone know, this ordinary spring afternoon was about to become anything but ordinary. Officer Morton stepped out of his patrol car for the second time, the warning ticket held loosely in his left hand. The whole process had taken less than 5 minutes, but inside the minivan, it had felt like hours to the Wilson family. As Morton approached, Samantha shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her small hands gripping the straps of her space-themed backpack. Mr. Wilson, I'm going to issue you a warning today for that broken taillight. Morton began, his tone different now, sharper, more aggressive. Something in the computer system had bothered him, though the records were clean. Perhaps it was the address. The Wilsons lived in Oak Hills, an up-and-coming neighborhood that rarely saw black families. Step out of the vehicle, please. Michael's heart sank. A simple warning had suddenly turned into something else. Officer, may I ask why? I thought this was just about the taillight. His voice remained steady, but Sarah could hear the slight tremor of concern. She reached over and squeezed her husband's arm gently. Sir, I said step out of the vehicle, Morton repeated, his hand moving to rest on his utility belt. The afternoon sun cast his shadow through the driver's window, making him appear larger than life to the children in the back seat. In the back, Samantha's breathing quickened. Just last week, her class had watched a documentary about civil rights. The images from that film began mixing with the scene unfolding before her. She watched as her father, still in his business suit from work, slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. Daddy, don't go, Samantha whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Marcus, not fully understanding but sensing his sister's fear, began to sniffle beside her. Michael turned back to his children, trying to smile reassuringly. It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's going to be fine. I'm just going to talk to the officer for a minute. But Samantha could see the worry in his eyes, the same worry she'd noticed whenever they watched the news about similar situations. As Michael stepped out, Sarah pulled out her phone discreetly and began recording. Another lesson they'd learned from too many news stories. Across the street, Mrs. Rodriguez, their neighbor who had been watering her garden, also took notice and pulled out her phone. Officer Morton directed Michael to the back of the minivan, positioning him spread eagle against the trunk. The position made Michael visible to his children through the rear window, and Samantha watched in growing distress as the officer began a pat-down. Sir, what seems to be the problem? Michael asked again, his voice steady despite the humiliation of being searched in front of his family. I have the right to know why I'm being detained. Inside the car, Samantha's anxiety reached a breaking point. She was a bright child who read the news on her tablet every morning, who understood more than most 9-year-olds about what could happen in these situations. The science fair trophy in her backpack suddenly felt meaningless compared to her fear for her father. Stop, please stop, Samantha called out, her voice carrying through the open windows. He didn't do anything wrong. She unbuckled her seatbelt, her hands shaking. Sarah turned quickly. Samantha, stay in your seat, baby. Please. But Samantha was already reaching for the door handle. Years of being told to stand up for what was right, to speak out against injustice, lessons taught at school and at home, pushed her forward. The door clicked open. Officer Morton's head snapped toward the sound. Stay in the vehicle, he barked, his command echoing down the quiet suburban street. But Samantha was already stepping out, her school uniform neat and pressed, her small frame shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. He's my daddy, she said, her voice somehow both trembling and strong. He was just taking us home from school. We didn't do anything wrong. The situation had suddenly shifted. Morton's attention was now split between Michael at the trunk and Samantha standing by the car door. Sarah quickly got out too, moving toward her daughter. More neighbors had emerged from their homes, phones raised, recording the scene that was rapidly spiraling out of control. Get back in the car, Morton shouted, his face reddening. All of you, back in the car now. But Samantha stood her ground, tears streaming down her face. She thought about Ruby Bridges, about the stories they'd learned in school. Her voice rose again, stronger this time. You can't treat people like this. It's not right. Morton's next decision would not only change his life, but would spark a nationwide conversation about police conduct and racial bias. The next few moments would be replayed millions of times across social media, dissected on news channels, and used in police training sessions for years to come. The afternoon sun continued to shine brightly, illuminating a scene that was about to become a pivotal moment in Rochester's history. Time seemed to slow down as Officer Morton made a decision that would haunt him forever. His face flushed with anger, he strode toward 9-year-old Samantha, whose tears had now turned into quiet sobs. The girl's science fair medal still hung around her neck, glinting in the afternoon sun. I warned you to get back in the car, Morton growled, reaching for his handcuffs. The metal caught the sunlight, looking oversized and menacing compared to Samantha's small wrists. Sarah screamed, a sound that would later be described by witnesses as the cry of a mother's worst nightmare. She's just a baby. Sarah lunged forward, but a second patrol car had just arrived, and Officer Rodriguez, Morton's backup, held her back. Michael, still against the trunk, felt his legs go weak as he watched helplessly. Marcus pressed his face against the car window, crying and banging his small fists against the glass. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street had stopped watering her garden entirely. Her trembling hands held her phone steady as she recorded everything. She was now broadcasting live on Facebook, her commentary in Spanish mixing with her shocked gasps. Other neighbors poured out of their homes, forming a circle around the scene. "You have the right to remain silent." Morton began reading Samantha her rights, his voice mechanical, as if he was running on autopilot. The handcuffs clicked shut around her tiny wrists, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent street. Samantha's space-themed backpack slipped from her shoulders, spilling her books onto the pavement, her science project papers scattered in the spring breeze. Mr. Jenkins, a retired judge who lived 2 doors down, pushed through the growing crowd. "Officer, what in God's name are you doing?" His authoritative voice boomed. "She's a child. This is absolutely outside protocol." But Morton seemed to be in a world of his own, lost in some dark place where arresting a 9-year-old seemed reasonable. Samantha's quiet voice cut through the chaos. "I can't feel my hands." The handcuffs were too tight on her small wrists. A trickle of blood appeared where the metal bit into her skin. The sight of that small red line would later become a powerful symbol in news reports and protest signs. Sarah had collapsed to her knees, still held back by Officer Rodriguez, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. "Please," she begged. "She's just a little girl. She's in the 4th grade. Please don't do this." The crowd had grown larger. Phones recorded from every angle as Morton began walking Samantha toward his patrol car. Her small legs could barely keep up with his pace, causing her to stumble. Her school uniform, a neat blue plaid jumper that Sarah had ironed just that morning, was now dirty from falling against the patrol car. "Mommy!" Samantha cried out, her voice small and frightened. "Daddy, I'm sorry. I just wanted to help." The words cut through everyone present like a knife. Several onlookers were openly weeping. A group of teenagers on bikes had stopped to record the scene, their young faces twisted in horror. Inside the minivan, Marcus had managed to unlock his door. He ran out, his 7-year-old frame shaking with sobs, clutching Samantha's fallen backpack. "Give my sister back," he screamed, his voice raw with emotion. Officer Rodriguez finally let go of Sarah to grab Marcus, preventing him from running toward the patrol car. Michael found his voice again, years of professional composure cracking. "She needs her EpiPen," he shouted, remembering Samantha's severe allergies. "It's in her backpack. You can't take her without her medicine." But Morton was already opening the patrol car door. The sound of sirens filled the air as more police cars arrived, along with the first news van. The story was spreading like wildfire across social media. Mrs. Rodriguez's live stream had already reached 10,000 viewers. The hashtag Samantha Wilson was beginning to trend. Morton pushed Samantha's head down to guide her into the back of his patrol car, just as he had done with countless adults before. Her small face pressed against the window, tears streaming down her cheeks, creating dark spots on her collar. Through the glass, she could see her science fair medal had fallen to the ground, now lying broken in the street. The police sergeant's car screeched to a halt at the scene. Sergeant Thompson jumped out, his face dark with anger as he took in the situation. He had received 17 calls in the past 3 minutes about this incident, including one from the mayor herself. The next 10 minutes would change everything, for Morton, for the Wilson family, and for police departments across the country. But right now, all anyone could focus on was the sight of a terrified 9-year-old girl, handcuffed in the back of a police car, while her helpless family watched in horror. Within 30 minutes of Samantha Wilson's arrest, the entire world seemed to be watching Rochester, New York. Mrs. Rodriguez's live stream had exploded across social media platforms, reaching over 1 million views. Her shaky footage, showing a uniformed officer handcuffing a crying 9-year-old in a school uniform, had struck a nerve that would send shockwaves through the nation. Inside the growing crowd, 17-year-old Kevin Martinez, an aspiring filmmaker, had captured the clearest video of the incident. His steady hands and perfect angle showed everything. Samantha's brave stance, the oversized handcuffs, the broken science fair medal, and her tearful face pressed against the police car window. When he posted the video with the caption, "They arrested a fourth grader for defending her dad. Rochester PD has gone too far," it took only minutes to go viral. News vans from every major network descended upon Maple Street. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades chopping through the afternoon air. The peaceful suburban neighborhood had transformed into what looked like a war zone. Reporters in pressed suits clutched microphones, delivering live updates to millions of horrified viewers across the country. Breaking news: 9-year-old honor student arrested during routine traffic stop, scrolled across TV screens nationwide. Cell phones buzzed with notifications as the story spread. Hashtag Justice for Samantha and hashtag She's9 became the top trending topics on social media platforms. Sarah Wilson sat on the curb, surrounded by neighbors who tried to comfort her. Her phone rang constantly, calls from family members, journalists, and civil rights attorneys. Marcus clung to his mother, still clutching his sister's backpack, his small body shaking with hiccups from crying so hard. Michael Wilson stood with their family lawyer, David Chen, who had arrived breathless at the scene after seeing the viral videos. "This ends today," Chen announced to the gathered press, his voice firm and controlled. What happened to Samantha Wilson is not just a violation of police protocol, it's a violation of human decency. Inside the police station, Samantha sat in a chair that was too big for her feet barely touching the floor. A kind female officer had removed the handcuffs, revealing angry red marks on her small wrists. The school nurse, Mrs. Thompson, had rushed to the station with Samantha's spare EpiPen, refusing to leave the girl's side. "I just wanted to help my daddy," Samantha repeated softly, her voice hoarse from crying. The female officer, Detective Lisa Martinez, felt her own eyes well up as she documented the marks on Samantha's wrists for evidence. In her 20 years on the force, she had never seen anything like this. Outside the police station, a crowd gathered. Students from Samantha's school arrived with their parents, holding signs that read, "She's our classmate," and "Kids shouldn't be criminals." Samantha's science teacher, Mr. Roberts, stood at the front, holding her winning science project poster about renewable energy. The videos continued to spread. Celebrity activists shared them with millions of followers. Famous athletes and musicians posted messages of support. A popular children's author announced she would write a book about Samantha's courage. Online fundraisers for the Wilson family's legal fees reached hundreds of thousands of dollars within hours. Back at the scene, forensics teams photographed the broken science medal in the street. Nobody had moved it. It had become a powerful symbol. Local artists were already creating murals of it on nearby walls. A photographer from a major magazine captured what would become an iconic image. The golden medal lying broken on the asphalt, Samantha's school portrait reflected in its shattered surface. Officer Morton sat alone in an interview room, watching the videos play on endless loops on the station's TV. His face had turned ashen as he realized what he had done. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from fellow officers, most expressing disbelief and disappointment. His own daughter, the same age as Samantha, had texted, "Dad, how could you?" The police chief called an emergency press conference, his face grave as cameras flashed. "What happened today goes against everything we stand for," he declared, his hands gripping the podium. "We are taking immediate action. Officer Morton has been suspended, and a full investigation is underway." Social media continued to explode with reactions. A video of Marcus crying, "Give my sister back," had been viewed 20 million times. Interviews with shocked neighbors played on repeat. Mrs. Rodriguez, still holding her garden hose, had become an overnight sensation for her quick thinking in broadcasting the incident. As the sun began to set on that fateful day, Maple Street remained crowded with protesters, reporters, and concerned citizens. The simple broken taillight stop had become a national moment of reckoning, and everyone knew that tomorrow would bring even more attention to this quiet suburban street in Rochester. Police Chief Robert Thompson paced in his office, the wooden floor creaking under his heavy steps. 6 screens mounted on his wall showed different news channels, all broadcasting the same story: Samantha Wilson's arrest. His phone hadn't stopped ringing for the past 2 hours. The mayor, the governor, and even the White House had called demanding answers. "Get me Morton's entire file," he barked into his intercom, His secretary, Linda, who had worked at the department for 30 years, was already pushing through his door with a thick folder. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on his desk. "Chief," Linda said softly, "there's something else you should see." She placed her tablet in front of him. The screen showed Morton's training records. Several red flags jumped out immediately: missed de-escalation sessions, 3 complaints about aggressive behavior in the past year, all of them involving minorities. How had they missed this pattern? Down the hall, in interview room 3, Internal Affairs Lieutenant Sarah Chen faced Officer James Morton. The usually confident officer sat slumped in his chair, his uniform wrinkled, his badge already surrendered. The room's single light cast harsh shadows across his face. "Walk me through your thought process," Chen said, her voice professional but cold. "What made you think handcuffing a 9-year-old honor student was an appropriate response?" The camera in the corner blinked red, recording everything. Morton opened his mouth, then closed it again. On the table between them lay photographs. Samantha's bruised wrists, her torn school uniform, the broken science medal. Next to these sat Morton's performance reviews. 15 years of service, once considered a model officer. I don't know," he finally whispered. "Everything happened so fast. When she stepped out of the car." His voice trailed off as tears began rolling down his cheeks. The tough cop facade had cracked completely. In the station's main lobby, Officers Rodriguez and Martinez were organizing an impromptu press conference. They had decided to break the traditional blue wall of silence. Nearly 50 officers stood behind them, all removing their badges in a show of solidarity, not with Morton, but with Samantha. "We are parents too," Rodriguez announced, his voice echoing through the packed lobby. "What happened today goes against everything we swore to protect. We stand with Samantha Wilson." The gathered media captured the powerful moment as officer after officer placed their badges on a table, creating a mountain of silver shields. Upstairs, in the department's computer lab, tech specialists worked frantically. Morton's body cam footage was being enhanced and analyzed. Each frame told a darker story: the fear in Samantha's eyes, the trembling of her small hands, the moment the handcuffs cut into her skin. Chief Thompson watched the footage for the 14th time, his face growing darker with each viewing. His own granddaughter was Samantha's age. The thought made his stomach turn. On his desk, a new report had just arrived. A complete audit of every arrest Morton had made in the past 5 years. "Sir," his assistant called from the doorway, "the police union representatives are here." Thompson waved them away. For the first time in his 30-year career, he wasn't interested in the union's perspective. This wasn't about protecting their own anymore. This was about fundamental change. In the department's break room, younger officers huddled around a TV watching live coverage. Many had tears in their eyes. Officer Jenny Martinez, a rookie just 3 months on the force, stood up suddenly. "This is why I became a cop," she declared. "Not to hurt people, but to protect them. We need to be better." The chief's phone rang again. This time, it was the police academy director. They had already begun rewriting their training programs, using the incident as a case study in what not to do. Morton's actions would be taught to future generations of officers as an example of how quickly poor judgment could destroy public trust. Outside the station, the crowd had grown larger. Signs reading "Police should protect, not threaten," and "Children deserve better" filled the air. But something was different about this protest. Many off-duty officers had joined the crowd, standing shoulder to shoulder with civilians. As evening approached, Chief Thompson finally finished writing his official statement. The words were clear and unequivocal. Officer Morton would be terminated immediately. A complete overhaul of department policies would begin tomorrow. The Wilson family would receive a formal apology. The department's response would become a model for police forces nationwide. But for now, in that quiet office, Chief Thompson added one final personal line to his statement. "Today, we didn't just fail Samantha Wilson. We failed every child who should look to police officers as protectors, not threats." That changes today. The morning after Samantha's arrest, Rochester woke up to a transformed city. Central Park, just across from the police station, had become the epicenter of a peaceful but powerful uprising. By 7 a.m., over 5,000 people had gathered, their voices rising in unified purpose. The crowd was unlike anything the city had seen before. Parents pushing strollers, Teachers carrying lesson plans, students in their school uniforms, and even off-duty police officers in civilian clothes. Sarah Thompson, Samantha's fourth-grade teacher, stood on a hastily constructed platform. Her hands shook as she held up Samantha's last homework assignment, an essay titled, "What I Want to Be When I Grow Up." She began reading. "I want to be a police officer to help people and make the world better." The crowd fell silent, many wiping tears from their eyes. At Rochester Academy, Samantha's empty desk became a symbol. Her classmates had covered it with flowers, notes, and small gifts. Miss Rodriguez's science class, where Samantha had won first place just last week, sat in complete silence for the first 10 minutes of class. Even the usually chatty students understood the weight of the moment. "She always shared her lunch with me," Tommy Chen, Samantha's best friend, told a reporter from the local news. "She's the kindest person I know. How could they hurt someone so nice?" His words, spoken with childhood innocence, would later become one of the most shared quotes across social media. By noon, civil rights leaders from across the country had arrived in Rochester. The Reverend Michael Jackson, a prominent activist, addressed the growing crowd. "Today, it's not just about Samantha Wilson. It's about every child who has ever felt afraid instead of protected, threatened instead of served." Local businesses showed their support in various ways. The corner bakery handed out free Justice cookies decorated with badges crossed out in red. The neighborhood coffee shop changed its name for the day to Samantha's Safe Space and offered free drinks to protesters. Even Mr. Johnson, the grumpy owner of the hardware store, hung a large banner reading, "Protect our children, not your pride." At the Wilsons' church, Reverend Mary Stevens organized a prayer circle that stretched around the entire building. "We're not just praying for Samantha," she announced to the gathered faithful. "We're praying for change, for understanding, and yes, even for Officer Morton's soul." The city's teachers' union called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to introduce a new curriculum about civil rights and community policing. "Our children need to know their rights," declared Union President Sarah Martinez, "but they'd also need to know that most police officers are good people who protect us. What happened to Samantha was wrong, and we must teach our children how to prevent it from happening again." Outside the police station, a group of veterans had formed a silent line, each holding an American flag. Their leader, Sergeant James Wilson, no relation to Samantha, explained to reporters, "We fought for a country where children should feel safe, not terrorized. This is not the America we defended." The protest took on a unique character as children became its heart. A group of Girl Scouts arrived in their uniforms, selling Justice cookies, and donating all proceeds to a newly created legal fund for children's rights. Boy Scout Troop 157 helped organize water stations and first aid points throughout the crowd. Local artists worked through the day, creating a massive mural on a permitted wall near the park. The image showed Samantha's broken science medal transformed into a rising phoenix, with the words "From Fear to Freedom" painted in bright, hopeful colors. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose live stream had first brought attention to the incident, now led a workshop teaching people how to safely and legally record police interactions. "Knowledge is power," she said, her garden hose replaced with a smartphone. "We must be the eyes of justice." As evening approached, the crowd had swelled to over 20,000. The mayor appeared briefly but was met with calls for action, not speeches. The protesters' demands were clear: complete reform of police training, independent oversight of all arrests involving minors, and mandatory community service for all officers. The most powerful moment came as the sun set. Thousands of people lit candles, creating a sea of light. In the center, Samantha's empty science fair display stood illuminated, her project about renewable energy now symbolizing the renewable spirit of a community demanding change. The day ended with a children's choir singing, "We Shall Overcome," while hundreds of small hands released biodegradable balloons into the darkening sky. Each balloon carried a simple message: for Samantha, for all children, for change. The internal affairs investigation into Officer James Morton's conduct began at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning, 3 days after Samantha's arrest. Lieutenant Maria Ramirez, a 20-year veteran known for her thoroughness, sat in a dimly lit room surrounded by stacks of files, computer screens, and evidence boxes. Her task: to uncover every detail of Morton's career and the events that led to this catastrophic incident. Start from the beginning, she muttered, opening Morton's personnel file. The first red flag appeared immediately. Morton had been transferred from 3 different precincts in the past 5 years. Each transfer request was vaguely worded, but a pattern emerged. They'd all followed complaints from minority residents. On one screen, security footage from a nearby house showed the entire traffic stop in crystal clear detail. Ramirez watched it for the 100th time, noting how Morton's body language changed the moment he saw Michael Wilson was black. The footage showed no threatening behavior from any member of the Wilson family. "Lieutenant," called Officer Chen from the doorway, holding a thick stack of papers. "We found something in Morton's social media history." The printouts revealed a disturbing pattern of liked posts and shared articles, all showing clear racial bias. Morton had been careful to keep his public profile clean, but his private accounts told a different story. Down the hall, Detective James Rodriguez interviewed Morton's former partners. Officer Sarah Martinez, who had worked with him 2 years ago, broke down crying during her statement. "I requested a transfer after 1 month," she admitted. "The way he treated minority civilians, I couldn't watch it anymore. I should have reported it then. This is partly my fault." The investigation uncovered more troubling details. Morton had skipped 8 mandatory sensitivity training sessions in the past year alone. His excuse notes, all claiming family emergencies, were revealed to be false. Phone records showed him at a local bar during several of these missed sessions. In the evidence room, forensics expert Dr. Lisa Chen examined the handcuffs used on Samantha. The amount of force applied was excessive, she noted in her report. The marks on her wrists indicate the cuffs were tightened far beyond necessary restraint levels, especially for a child of her size. Lieutenant Ramirez's team discovered a pattern in Morton's traffic stops. Data analysis showed he was 6 times more likely to stop vehicles driven by people of color. His search rates and arrest rates showed similar disparities. The numbers were too consistent to be coincidental. "Look at this," Detective Thompson called out, pointing to his computer screen. He had found body camera footage from Morton's previous arrests. In case after case, the same aggressive behavior appeared, but only with minority civilians. With white civilians, his demeanor was markedly different, often letting them off with warnings for similar violations. The investigation also revealed that Morton had faced 3 civilian complaints in the past year alone. All had been quietly dismissed without proper investigation. The officer in charge of reviewing these complaints, Sergeant Bill Hayes, was now also under investigation for negligence. Mrs. Wilson's cell phone footage provided crucial evidence. The audio clearly captured Morton's tone changing from professional to hostile without provocation. Expert analysis of the footage confirmed no threatening movements or actions from any family member that could justify his response. Perhaps most damning was the discovery in Morton's locker. Behind his spare uniform, investigators found a personal notebook. Its pages contained racist jokes, controversial political viewpoints, and disturbing comments about minority communities. The notebook became key evidence of his long-standing prejudices. By week's end, Lieutenant Ramirez had compiled a devastating report. It outlined 15 separate violations of department policy, 20 instances of racial profiling, and a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior. The report also highlighted systemic failures within the department that had allowed Morton's behavior to continue unchecked. "This isn't just about one bad officer," Ramirez explained to the police chief, pointing to her findings. "Our entire system of oversight failed. We missed dozens of warning signs. The question isn't just why Morton did this, but how we let him keep his badge long enough to do it." The investigation expanded to include other officers who had ignored or covered up Morton's behavior. 3 supervisors were placed on administrative leave. The department's training program was suspended for complete review. Even the police union, usually quick to defend officers, remained silent after seeing the evidence. As Lieutenant Ramirez prepared her final report, she added a personal note. The arrest of Samantha Wilson was not an isolated incident, but the inevitable result of unchecked bias and systemic failure. This case demands not just individual accountability, but complete departmental transformation. The investigation had uncovered not just one officer's misconduct, but a broken system that needed complete rebuilding. The findings would soon lead to the most significant police reforms in the city's history. 6 months after the incident that shook Rochester, the city gathered again in Central Park. This time, the occasion was different. Samantha Wilson, now 10 years old, stood on a stage alongside the mayor and police chief. Her once injured wrists now held a large pair of ceremonial scissors, ready to cut the ribbon for the new Children's Justice and Community Center. The morning sun shone on Samantha's face as she addressed the crowd of thousands. Gone was the frightened child from that terrible day. In her place stood a young leader, wearing a new school uniform with a shining Junior Community Ambassador badge. "What happened to me was wrong," she said, her clear voice carrying across the silent crowd. "But look what we built from it." Behind her stood the new center, its walls decorated with murals of children from all backgrounds, standing together with police officers, teachers, and community leaders. Former Officer James Morton's fate had been sealed 2 months earlier. The judge's sentence was unprecedented. 5 years in prison for civil rights violations, mandatory rehabilitation, and a lifetime ban from law enforcement nationwide. But more importantly, Morton had finally understood the weight of his actions. During the trial, he had looked Samantha in the eyes and delivered a tearful apology. "I'm not that scared little girl anymore," Samantha continued, as her parents watched proudly from the front row. "Now I'm helping other kids learn their rights and teaching police officers how to be better." The crowd erupted in applause as she described the new programs she had helped design. The Samantha Wilson Act had passed unanimously in the state legislature. The new law required extensive retraining for all police officers, banned the handcuffing of minors except in extreme circumstances, and established independent oversight committees that included youth representatives. Other states were already beginning to adopt similar measures. Rochester's police department had undergone a complete transformation. Chief Thompson proudly introduced his new team of community officers, including Sarah Martinez, now promoted to lead the Youth Engagement Division. Every officer wore a new badge design, created by Samantha herself, featuring a child's handprint alongside the traditional shield. Marcus, Samantha's younger brother, had also found his voice. He now led the department's Kids and Cops program, where children and officers spent time together in non-threatening situations, playing sports and working on community projects. His once tearful cry of "Give my sister back" had transformed into "Let's work together." Mrs. Rodriguez, whose live stream had first exposed the incident, now ran the center's media literacy program. She taught both children and officers about responsible documentation of police interactions. Her garden hose had been retired to the local history museum, displayed alongside Samantha's broken science medal as symbols of change. The Wilson family had established a foundation using the settlement money from their lawsuit. Instead of focusing on punishment, they chose to fund education and community building. Their first project? A scholarship program for minority students interested in law enforcement careers, aiming to build a more diverse and understanding police force. "Look around," Michael Wilson said in his speech that day. 6 months ago, we were divided by fear and mistrust. Today, we're united in purpose." He gestured to the mixed crowd of civilians and police officers, all wearing T-shirts with Samantha's foundation logo, a broken handcuff transformed into a bridge. The ceremony reached its emotional peak when Samantha's fourth-grade class performed a song they had written about community healing. Even the toughest officers wiped away tears as the children sang about turning pain into progress and fear into friendship. As Samantha cut the ribbon, dozens of white doves were released into the sky. Each bird carried a small message written by a different child in the community, sharing their hopes for the future. The moment was captured by the same cameras that had once recorded her arrest, but this time they captured hope instead of horror. The day ended with a community dinner right on the street where the incident had occurred. Police officers served food alongside community members. Children played safely under the watchful eyes of their new guardians. Both parents and reformed police officers would learn valuable lessons. "This isn't the end," Samantha concluded in her final speech, her voice strong and clear. "It's just the beginning of something beautiful." She held up her new Science Fair medal, awarded for a project on how communities heal and grow. Next to it hung her Junior Police Commissioner badge, symbols of how far they had all come. As the sun set on this new chapter in Rochester's history, the crowd joined hands. Officers, civilians, children, and adults. forming a human chain of unity around the new center. Samantha's story had transformed from a moment of injustice into a movement of lasting change, proving that sometimes the worst moments can bring out the best in a community.